Venom: The Last Dance is the third entry in the Venom trilogy starring Tom Hardy and is being marketed as the epic conclusion to this series. Venom movies are kind of a weird case study in how they've done everything fans haven't wanted and yet somehow still been very successful and even enjoyable to a degree. When the first movie came out, being a PG-13 90s buddy flick about this Spider-Man villain that doesn't have Spider-Man in it, reactions were mixed to say the least. Personally, I didn't really care for it, but it wasn't the train wreck that I was expecting it to be. The thing that kept the movie above water was Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock. The manic, paranoid energy he brings to that role was really entertaining to watch, and the bond that forms between him and Venom does make for a fun dynamic. And it seems like the rest of the internet agreed, as the amount of Simbrock fan art that came out after that movie was staggering. Which was funny enough on its own, but what made it even funnier was how heavily they leaned into it in the sequel.
I am out of the Eddie closet!
By this point, I feel like we all just collectively accepted that these are the type of Venom movies that we were getting, so we might as well enjoy the ride. And that is exactly what I did with Venom: Let There Be Carnage. While it's not a good movie, it was a lot more enjoyable than the first. The inclusion of Woody Harrelson as Carnage added to the cheese factor, the action was fun, if a bit messily shot, the shipping fodder between Eddie and Venom was adorable, and god damn it, they fooled us with that after credits scene. So going into this, not just after all the garbage that's come out of the Sonyverse, but with them pushing this as the epic finale to this trilogy, I was kinda curious how it would go. And so what did I think of the movie? It was pretty good. For this series and what it's decided to be, I honestly think this was the best one in the trilogy. The movie still has a shit ton of problems, and there are some really stupid things in it, but I did find myself enjoying this the most out of those other ones. The story kind of throws you right in, not just picking up immediately where No Way Home in the second film left off, but offloading a fuck ton of exposition about Eddie and Venom's current situation, being on the run after being framed for murder, as well as the introduction of the villain, Null. It's constantly on the move, jumping from plot point to plot point, and it kind of left some plot points a bit half-baked. There's this vague shadow government watching over everything that doesn't really factor into anything. Null as a character is basically the Sonyverse equivalent of Darkseid, being placed in a powerless state until he gets the magical MacGuffin key that will destroy the world. His presence isn't really felt throughout the movie because he's just hiding behind a horde of tentacle chameleons and doesn't really do anything. And the way the MacGuffin key comes into being is one of the biggest plot holes ever. So the reason that Eddie and Venom are being pursued by these space lizards is because they have the key that will give Null his power, called the Codex. And when Eddie died in the first movie and Venom brought him back, their bond created the key or something, and as long as they're both alive, the aliens can take the key and Null will gain his power. But then at Area 51, there are other symbiotes being held that eventually attach to some of the scientists, so why couldn't they have just made another codex with them? Is it something that's exclusive to Eddie and Venom? Can multiple codexes exist at the same time? Who cares? Here's Venom dancing to ABBA. There are just a lot of stupid, cheesy story elements that fit into that late 90s, early 2000s era of shitty comic book movie that this and the other Sonyverse movies seem to be trapped in. But it kind of loops back around and falls into that so bad it's good territory, so it's hard to stay mad at it. I will say from a production standpoint, this one is noticeably more unpolished than the other two, with some pretty laughably bad ADR, almost like the sound editor for this movie was Ezekiel Sims, and another big CG goo fight towards the end. But like I said, the thing that holds this movie above water is, once again, the relationship between Eddie and Venom. They have some great interaction, some genuinely heartfelt moments, and by the time the movie reaches the conclusion, you do kind of feel sad that this might be the last time they'll see each other. I gotta be honest, I fully expected them to kiss at the end. Ultimately, I know this review is all over the place, but so are these Venom movies. I know we could have gotten better, but for what we did get, I think these are perfectly fine, and this movie was a serviceable send-off until they decide to bring Venom back. It's goofy, but just in the right way. There was no Eminem song during the credits though, so 1 out of 5. And going to my ranking, I'd give Venom: The Last Dance a 3.5 out of 5.